This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Is your pet stressed out? Does your pet need annual vaccines? Which pet is best for a child? Would you know if your dog was in pain? Pet Life Radio presents The Pet Doctor, where you'll learn everything about keeping your pet healthy and happy. From pet care, pet meds and grooming, to pet food, pet insurance, and dental care, this is the place to find out everything there is to know about pet wellness. Whether you have a dog, cat, reptile, or rabbit, you'll find answers for your pets straight from the vets, because it's your pet. Health matters. Please welcome your Pet Doctor host, veterinary media consultant and veterinarian, Dr. Bernadine Cruz.
What do Overland Park, Kansas, the California cities of San Francisco, Thousand Oaks, Salinas and Oceanside, along with Laredo, Texas, Clarksville, Tennessee, Portland, Oregon, Providence, Rhode Island, and Jersey City, New Jersey have in common? They share the dubious honor of being named earlier this year the top 10 cities in the United States with the highest percentage increases in positive heartworm tests in our companion pets. This mosquito-borne disease can be deadly to cats and dogs, and it's 100% preventable. But what if you don't live in one of these areas? What if your pet is totally indoors? What if you've never seen mosquitoes? Do you still have to worry? My guest today is an expert in veterinary parasitology and has had first-hand experience in the devastating effects that this disease can have on our pets. Dr. Cassan Pulaski has a Master's of Preventive Health and is a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. She's a member of the board of the Companion Animal Parasite Council, a postdoctoral research and teaching associate at the University of Georgia, and director of the parasitology section of the Athens Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory. She knows what she's talking about, and we'll be chatting with her right after this short break.
Does your dog itch, scratch, stink, or shed like crazy? Come to Dynovite for help.
Order a 90-day supply of Dynovite.
Dynovite for life.
Pick up 2 tubes of Dogosuds.
Get the 3rd tube free.
Peppermint, tea tree, lavender, Dogosud shampoo.
Made with all-natural coconut, jojoba, aloe. Great for healthy skin and soft, shiny coats.
But no itchy, harsh chemicals.
Lather up, rinse away.
Try Dogosuds. Buy 2, get 1 free.
At Dynovite.com.
DINOVITE.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
Dr. Pulaski, thank you very much for being with us. I honestly have to admit, I was shocked when I saw the number of cities in California, because that's where I am, that are having problems with heartworms. So again, thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you guys about heartworm disease and what we can kind of all do, both pet owners and veterinarians alike, what we can do to kind of work on some of these numbers and get these numbers back down, moving in the right direction.
People oftentimes, I'll have clients come in and tell them about heartworm disease going, well, I just had a fecal sample done and I don't see any worms in its poop. It's like, no, that's why it's called heartworm disease. So Please tell us, what is heartworm disease?
So heartworm disease, it's caused by a filarial parasite, Dirofilaria immitis. And so we call them heartworms, right? But they really kind of heart and lung worms because the adult parasite, when a dog is infected, they're actually going to reside in those vessels that are between in the heart and the lung. This can result in, eventually, if left untreated, can result in essentially a right-sided heart failure. So these worms are big worms. Everyone is always so surprised whenever they see actually how big these worms are. But when these adult worms are in an animal, in a dog particularly, right, the heart is having to pump so hard and work so hard to move blood effectively through the body that it eventually just kind of wears out. And so this disease, right, it's not something that someone is going to see in a fecal sample. A lot of times these early stages, the early signs of heartworm disease are very mild, so maybe a light cough, a little exercise intolerance. And so these are symptoms that people may or may not realize are significant. And how a dog that's infected with heartworms, how he gets it is through the bite of a mosquito, an infected mosquito. So when a dog is infected with heartworms, the mom and the daddy heartworm inside the animal are going to produce what we call microfilaria, the baby heartworms, and those are circulating in the blood. And when a mosquito comes in and bites that dog, it's going to ingest those microfilaria, and then after about 2 weeks or so, those microfilaria have developed into a stage that is ready to infect a new dog. And so when that mosquito comes around and goes and feeds on another dog, those larvae, what we call the L3 or the infective stage, are actually left on the surface of the skin. And it's one of the things why, parasites, obviously I like them and I think that they're amazing, but this little microscopic larva is able to find the little hole left by that mosquito, make its way through that hole, and eventually go through some molts or development changes within the dog before it eventually resides in that final space, right, that area between the heart and the lungs.
It's interesting because I think people have heard of heartworm disease, but sadly, somewhat like myself, thinking, I live in an area that really, it's not endemic. It's not here all the time. It's somebody else's problem. It's not mine. I always tell clients are telling me, my dog never travels anywhere. We don't live in Georgia or South Carolina, places where mosquitoes take away small children during the summer because, there are so many of them. But this is truly now a national disease, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. So I'm originally from right outside New Orleans. I did both, all of my degrees, through at Louisiana State. That's in Baton Rouge. And so that is South Louisiana, right? The deep South is always the place that everyone just assumes that's where all the parasites are, right? That's where we have everything. And historically, those areas were places that had higher prevalence of heartworm disease. But we know now that this is changing. So not only do we think this is changing just based on environmental conditions, right? Because we know the climate is changing. We know people are seeing mosquitoes more often during different times of the year when maybe 20 years ago they weren't seeing them. But the big thing that I think people don't think about is that animals are moving. That it's not, even if a person's pet isn't traveling, even if they're not coming down to, visit Mardi Gras, in New Orleans, these other animals are traveling. And we are so, so thankful that there has been an initiative of moving and transporting homeless and rescue animals. I think historically, right, this was usually just done following a natural disaster. So we think about Katrina, and after Hurricane Katrina hit and all of the animals that were sent out across North America, not just the United States, but into Canada as well, following that natural disaster. And that used to be really, those were usually when we saw big movements of rescue and shelter and homeless animals. But now, fortunately, we've got a lot of people working hard with rescue organizations and transport groups to move animals from places where maybe they don't have a great chance getting adopted to areas where they have a much, much, much greater possibility of getting adopted. But unfortunately, this movement of animals also comes with the potential movement of these diseases. Some of these animals are infected, and sometimes they don't even know they're infected. Some groups may or may not be testing. We don't really know. And so these animals are moving from places, potentially from places where heartworm disease is highly endemic, right, to areas where maybe it's not as endemic or they don't see as many cases. And unfortunately, not all of the pet owners are aware of this change, right? And sometimes the veterinarians are not even aware of how prominent the disease may be in these animals that have come into their area.
I know I was amazed you're talking about transporting these rescue dogs, and yes, it has just been so heartwarming to know that there's a disaster. Yes, they always try to get these animals back to their owners. Sometimes it's just not possible, or those folks are unable to take care of those dogs. I think the stats were in 2017, there's about 31,000 rescue dogs that were transported from the southern U.S. just to Colorado. So you'd oftentimes think, well, you need to have a lot of dogs in order to now be a source of infection. But as I understand, it only takes one heartworm infected dog to really act as a reservoir for a huge area. How far can mosquitoes spread the disease in an area?
Well, so mosquitoes, there's a couple of different species that we normally think are implicated in transmitting heartworm disease. And each of the mosquitoes can have a different what we call flight range. That's the ability, the distance that they can fly. And so some mosquitoes, right, can traverse, we can talk about 200, 500 meters, sometimes up to miles, right, depending on the mosquito species. The interesting fact, right, like you said, you don't think, oh, well, one heartworm-infected dog, that shouldn't be a problem. But there was an amazing study from out of Arkansas from Dr. Tanya McKay, and what she looked at was normally in an area that we consider a heartworm endemic area, if I were to go put a bunch of mosquito traps out and trap mosquitoes and then test those mosquitoes for the presence of heartworm disease, normally in a high endemic area, we're thinking maybe 7 to 10% of those mosquitoes may be infected. However, what their research and their studies found was that if you have a dog that's microfilariemic, so this is a dog that has those baby heartworms in the blood, we've got a microfilariemic dog in the area, the percentage of mosquitoes that are now infected, the percentage of the pools infected jumps up to over 70%.
Oh, my goodness.
So what this means in a neighborhood, right, we have one new dog come in, we're all excited, Miss Jones down the street adopted, a dog out of Florida, and we're really excited about that, but maybe Miss Jones isn't aware of all of the risks of heartworm disease, and maybe her veterinarian hasn't checked that dog yet for heartworm disease. And in comes this new dog that we're all excited about, but if this dog is infected and has this stage, this microfilaria stage, mosquitoes come and bite that dog, and now everyone in that surrounding, all of the dogs in that surrounding area are now at an increased risk. And so it's really, really important that we realize that just because you're living in a place that wasn't historically considered, a heartworm hotspot, that things have changed, right? And this is something that we need to be thinking about. And this is why the Companion Animal Parasite Council, as well as the American Heartworm Society, all advocate for year-round prevention. We really want these animals whether it's every month with an oral or a topical, or every 6 months with an injectable product. We want all of our pets protected the entire year.
Dr. Pulaski, you were also mentioning, year-round, and I think that's where a lot of pet owners go, but I live in Wisconsin, and during the winter, it's so cold, nothing can survive outside. But now, as I understand, there are these little microclimates of mosquitoes, so even if you were to live in an area that is frozen over during the winter, those mosquitoes can still survive. Please tell us about these microclimates.
Yeah, so one of the things that they're realizing now is, so when you get a temperature reading, right, you look on your cell phone, you see what the temperature is going to be for that day. A lot of the times that temperature is coming from, a meteorologic station that may be on top of an airport. What that temperature is not reading is, say, the temperature on the ground, or the temperature between buildings, or the temperature in a shed, or in a basement, or a garage. And so we do know that there can be areas where the temperature may be a little bit warmer than you would expect, right, just looking on your phone at the temperature. One of the things we also do not know is that we do not know what is happening to the parasite, to the heartworms that are inside the mosquitoes, if those mosquitoes are doing something that we call overwintering. So certain species of mosquitoes will actually, some as an adult, will almost essentially hibernate, right, during these really, really cold times. And all they need is a little bit of warmth, right? A couple of sunny days when that temperature comes up, and those mosquitoes are going to become active again. And those mosquitoes may potentially be able to start spreading heartworm disease from that point. The other thing that I think that happens too is, we all find mosquitoes in our house too. I know it's really hard to imagine, in the middle of winter, but we do know that the mosquitoes don't just stay outside, right? They do come inside. And I understand it's always kind of been a frustrating argument to explain why in January or February, when you're, in Montana or Wisconsin, why you would need to do that. But I always advocate, and I always encourage people to just weigh the cost and the benefit, right? Are you really willing to take that risk with the disease that is potentially fatal? And, I'm sure we'll talk about my own dog, my own silly dog here, potentially fatal disease when it's really not, it just makes more sense to prevent the disease.
The medication, typically, as you're saying, these various ways of obtaining it, from orals to topicals to injectables, it's so cost effective. And yes, I've had clients who say, you're just trying to push this year round because you're trying to make money, or, they're not seeing the issue, so they're not top of mind as to, oh, it's a problem, my pet doesn't travel. But as you're saying, so many pets are traveling, not just the rescues. You go to your local big box store or hardware store, or you go wherever, and now dogs are always seeming to be with their pet owners and going with them, traveling throughout the United States. And maybe they're going someplace where, there was that one dog who was rescued, who now you have the mosquito, the vector, and it bit your dog, and you have no idea it ever happened.
Exactly. Yeah. And, just like you said, it's not worth, in my opinion, right, that risk. We all know, right, I think, so I practice as well, and I think we all know that kind of emergency call we get from a client for tapeworms, right? They see some, segments, they see something, they find see some worms in the poop, and they're really, really quick to call and make sure that they're getting deworming, and we get to have a talk about fleas. One of the things I think that is frustrating with heartworms is that we don't see it, right? The client is not seeing it. Sometimes they're not even seeing the clinical signs of the disease. And we know now, even before, so it takes about 6 months before we can detect heartworms. So a dog is infected. It takes about 6 months before we can detect that infection because of the fact that the test we use is an antigen-based test. And what it's looking for is a protein that a mature female worm is going to be secreting. And so 6 months may go by before we're able to detect it, but we do know now that damage is happening to these dogs even before we can detect that. We are seeing changes in blood pressure. We are seeing changes in the vasculature, right? We are seeing changes in the heart and lungs even before we can detect that this animal is infected with heartworms. And to me, there are so many different options available now to prevent this disease. Just like we discussed, right? We've got topicals, we've got orals, we've got injectables. There are a lot of options. And so I think that there's got to be, for everyone, there is going to be a solution. It's going to be an option for them that they can use, whether they're going for something because they're concerned about cost. There's products that are single-use products, right? Single parasite products that may be cheaper in cost. Maybe they want the convenience of a longer lasting or convenience of an all-in-one. We've got a lot of different products available. And so in my opinion, it really doesn't make sense why you wouldn't take this, try your best to eliminate this risk.
Dr. Pulaski, I understand that, as we're talking about heartworm disease, heart and lungs, but every once in a while the worm takes a wrong turn and you just happen to run into a dog, your own personal dog, that had an extremely unusual case of heartworm. Tell us about Pythagoras.
Yes, Pythagoras. So this is when, I'm just finishing up a PhD in a residency, veterinary parasitology PhD in residency at LSU. And when I was there, I was in the diagnostic lab, and I got a call from a veterinarian in the state of Louisiana that said, hey, I had this weird case. I've got this dog that had a wound on his foot. Now, he is a Cane Corso. It's a large
big dog.
It's an Italian Mastiff. And he said, look, this dog had this wound on his back foot. It really wasn't healing well. It wasn't responding to typical therapies. I went in there to do a little bit of surgical debridement, a little bit of cleanup, and I pulled out a worm. And he wanted to know. He sent me the worm. He said, what is this? And of course, right when I get it, I live and breathe heartworms. I'm like, this is a heartworm. Were you aware this dog had heartworms? And they said, yeah, we were aware, but we hadn't started treatment yet. And I said, okay, well, we need to talk about what's going on. And unfortunately, the owners, his previous owners, didn't have a lot of money available for all of the extensive treatments because essentially by this point, the dog's foot, one of his hind limbs it was dying, right? So there was worms there that were affecting.
Dr. Pulaski, can I be a tease? We need to take a break.
Okay.
So I think everyone right now is going, what happened? What happened to Pythagoras? But they're going to have to wait until we have this short message from our sponsors. And then we'll come back and learn all about Pythagoras. And I am just eager to hear about this. And it sounds like he's doing well. So, yes, stay tuned.
Please have a seat in the waiting room. The doctor will be with you shortly, right after these messages.
It's DesignerPetSweaters.com. Hand-knitted designer sweaters for your precious pup or cool cat. Beautiful couture patterns for your pets, including custom-knitted formal wear, casual wear, yachting, and even sports-themed. Many designer pet sweaters include feathered tammy hats, top hats, and a lot of sparkle. Each sweater includes leg loops, front paw sleeves, and leash opening. Visit DesignerPetSweaters.com to order your four-legged fashions today. Your pets will stay warm for the winter and be runway ready. Large or small, we fit them all. DesignerPetSweaters.com.
Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
Welcome back to the Pet Doctor on Pet Life Radio. The doctor is in, and we'll see you now.
All right, that was our break and that was our tease. So Pythagoras is this conic corsa, huge dog, wound on its foot. Doctor goes to clean it up. I think I would, freak out if I'm trying to clean up a wound and I'm pulling a worm out of this area. It's not, a maggot. So it's like, what is this thing? So, okay, you jump in there. What did you do? What did you find?
So, this is going to be a big problem, right, treatment. And so I actually went there not thinking that the dog, they were going to, unfortunately, were considering euthanizing him, right? And I went to the clinic because I was going to do a necropsy, right, a equivalent of an autopsy on a dog to look. And when I get there, the dog is still alive. And out he comes, and I can't describe it anything more than just Eeyore, right? Here he comes, kind of lumbering out. He's got one of his feet, he's not walking well. One of the legs is bandaged. And I'm a cat person, admittedly, and I hadn't had a discussion with my husband about a dog, but I just said, throw him in the back of my car. And it turns out, so we get him back, and I'm fortunate that a lot of my friends are also veterinary specialists, and we kind of got a whole team together. And when we were doing an ultrasound to look at his kidneys, because unfortunately with heartworm disease, we also can see some damage that happens to the kidneys. And this is because of antigen-antibody complexes. So this is proteins that are released by the parasite that the body doesn't like. They get deposited on the kidneys, and we can see some changes with these. And so we're doing an ultrasound, and what do we find but tons and tons of worms in his femoral arteries. So the femoral arteries, right, the major, and the really crazy thing is this is a totally different blood system, right? When you think about blood flowing in and out of the heart, we think about the oxygenated and the unoxygenated blood. And heartworms are usually living in that area before it gets to the lungs, right? So this is blood that's not oxygenated, doesn't have a high oxygen saturation. The femoral artery, however, is coming straight from the lungs, essentially, right? It's coming out that aorta, the abdominal aorta coming down, and so this is a very different environment. So, we were like, oh, what is happening here? This is very unusual. Long story short, we ended up having to do what we did, a bilateral femoral arterotomy to remove these worms. So we opened up the femoral arteries on each side. We have pulled out over 50 worms. These are adult heartworms. So these are worms that are several inches long, over 50 we pulled out from...
Like spaghetti.
Yes, spaghetti coming out from his legs. And unfortunately, he did lose one leg. That one leg was beyond saving, but we were able to save the other one. And, it was a lot of recovery, but he is doing great now, and he gets around, fine on three legs. I've always heard a orthopedic surgeon always told me animals are born with three legs and a spare, and I think that he definitely illustrates that.
And your husband is still your husband, even though you brought home this huge dog.
Yes. Yes, and now it's his dog now. He started an Instagram account and everything for him.
And I did see Pythagoras' Instagram account, and I see that typically you might think of these large dogs. They've had some bad reputation of being extremely aggressive. And here is Pythagoras curled up with your cat.
Yes. And that was a big, we were really scared at first, right? Because, like I said, I'm a cat person. My male tabby, he is no offense to my husband, but my male tabby is the love of my life. And, so we were scared at first. We were hesitant and cautious, but we did it, we followed what behaviorists recommend. We did everything slow and we're observant. And he is just, Pythagoras, we call him Russ for short. Russ is just quite a sweet, gentle guy. He gets named Pet of the Week frequently at his doggy daycare and everything. He's just a really sweet, gentle dog. So we lucked out with him for sure.
I love the Eeyore. So I think hearing about this, I've learned a lot as to it continues on with if it's a strange case that comes to the door, it's going to belong to a veterinarian or to a veterinary nurse. So yes, you've increased my faith in that particular statement. But what have you learned to help other veterinarians and pet owners about heartworm because of Pythagoras?
Yeah, so one of the big things, right, and so we do know it's not unusual for parasites to end up in the wrong place, what we call aberrant migration. This does happen. And there actually have been other reported cases of this, of heartworms coming up either in the arterial blood system. So I think that one, his case really opened my eyes up to how much more frequently this may be happening than we are aware. And the other thing, it's kind of, one of the clinical signs that he presented with was a heartworm-positive dog with some lameness and some weak femoral pulses. And so that was kind of one of these clinical signs that I think other practitioners can use, right? So we have a dog that's got a lameness that we can't really pinpoint exactly what's happening. And if we've got some weak femoral pulses, I think that that's probably a good indication to maybe start thinking, in a known heartworm-positive dog, to maybe start thinking about some of these alternatives. I think the other thing, too, right, is we just know heartworm disease, not only is it a, potentially fatal cardiopulmonary disease, but we can see a lot of different manifestations, and unfortunately they can be just as devastating. And so I think that's another important reason why we have to do everything we can, no matter where you're living, doing everything we can to prevent this disease, because it's not just a cough, it's not just an exercise intolerance. I mean, this can result in, a dog losing a leg. And, I was very fortunate that as a veterinarian and with a lot of veterinarian friends, I can get things at a different cost. I mean, if a client had Pythagoras, had gone through that, easily, they would have spent upwards of $25,000 on everything for easily. And so
everyone is taking a deep breath, right? $25,000. Okay.
Yes. And so, it's not, and you think about how, compared to that, right, $25,000, how cheap it is to prevent heartworm disease, right, with, a monthly or every 6-month prevention, it just doesn't, that risk is not worth it.
So we're talking about misconceptions. So the misconception that it's just heart and lungs. You're going to have a cough. But here you had a dog with lameness. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of how to properly protect your pet. It's only going to be during the summer season when I see these heartworms. I've been giving it routinely. I might miss it every once in a while. So my veterinarian who wants to test my dog for heartworm disease, they're just trying to make money. That's all they're trying to do. I don't need to test my dog. It's on this medication. What are some of the biggest misperceptions that pet owners have about properly protecting their pet?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, like you said, think, well, I'm pretty good, all right, I'm pretty compliant with giving the preventative drugs. Why would I need to test every year? Or, hey, last year I wasn't that great. My dog was tested and it was negative, so I don't see why I need to test again. And so I think that there's a couple of things that people need to be aware of with that. So one, we know that the drugs are great, right? We know that our preventative drugs are highly effective. But unfortunately, we do also know they're very, very rare cases, but there are incidences of parasites, of heartworms that are resistant to the drugs. And so it's really, really important to make sure that, one, we're testing just so that we can find out if the animal's infected, but two, say your pet does get heartworms and you've been giving your preventative drugs compliantly. Every month you've been getting tested every year. If that information exists in your record, the drug companies will pay for you to treat the heartworms, right? They will
that
pay
is
for
always
the heartworm
amazing.
treatment. But you have to have a good testing and a good prevention purchase history. So if we're not testing every year, or if we're missing some months, even if it is a case of a drug-resistant strain, you may or may not get that full reimbursement. And we know, right, the treatment, it's an arsenic-based treatment. It's not something that we should take lightly. It is now, having gone through that, because we removed the worms from Pythagoras, but then he also had to go through the traditional melarsoline treatment. And it's challenging, right? It's not pleasant. And this is a treatment that can get very expensive as well. And so making sure that you're getting tested every year, that we have good purchase history, allows you to have a claim for that guarantee. We also know... Go ahead.
I always tell people that it's kind of like birth control pills. So many women take birth control pills, and it'll always say highly effective, but there is no medication that's 100% effective. You hope that your birth control pill is, and you hope that, yes, your heartworm preventive pill is also. But yes, I think it's highly important to test on a routine basis. Thank you for talking about that. You were about to say, I'm sorry.
No, and one of the other things that I always I think people should view, say you missed some months and we still came up negative, your veterinarian is also going to recommend that you recheck again in 6 months because, as we said, right, the life cycle takes 6 months before we can detect it. But I really think if that happens, if we miss some months, how I talk to my clients, if they miss some months and it comes up negative, I consider that we have dodged a bullet, right? We have dodged a bullet. And one of the things that I really advocate for, particularly for in a practice, is that veterinarians and the veterinary team, we really need to work on celebrating that negative test. So when it's so easy for us to kind of just say, oh, well, the heartworm test was negative this year. The client's been giving, the pet owner's been giving the drugs like they should, the preventatives like they should. Every year they come in, it's negative. We kind of sometimes act like that's just a side note. It's just almost comes off as kind of boring, like, oh, on your way you're checking out, right? They're leaving, oh yeah, your heartworm test is negative. This is something that we should celebrate. This is something
we should do the happy dance.
Excited. Exactly. I make little baggies. I make little baggies that have little dog treats in them, so that the client can give it to their pup when they get home. Because this is something. What that means is that the pet owner is doing a good job. The products are working well, and we are doing a good job to make sure that our pet owners are educated about how important it is to prevent this disease.
Dr. Pulaski, we've been talking all about dogs, but we know cats can also get this. So you have a totally indoor cat, or you have that little poodlette who doesn't go outside. Are they still at risk? Do cats need to be protected?
Yes, they definitely need to be protected. I know one of the studies that's frequently mentioned is earlier on, a few years ago, there was a study looking at heartworm disease in cats. And we know that heartworm disease in cats is very different than heartworm disease in dogs. And so one of the ways we know that it's different, the normal, what we think of the definitive host, the animal that heartworms want to be in, are dogs and dog-like, right? So wolves, foxes, dogs. Cats are different, and the heartworms aren't exactly happy to be in there. And because of that, we know that there is, both because of the cat's anatomy and because of the heartworm's preferred host, there is quite an immune response. The immune system is highly, highly charged when a cat is infected with heartworm. And so unfortunately, because of that, just one heartworm alone, not even a full-grown heartworm, is enough to kill a cat. And we also know from studies that they've done looking at heartworm disease in cats that, upwards of 20% of cats that were positive were classified by their owners as quote-unquote indoor only. So we all know, right, anyone that's spending time in the clinic, we know indoor only can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, right? Indoor only may mean, well, they have a litter box inside, so that means they're mostly inside, or indoor only, maybe they never go outside. But we also know those mosquitoes, as I mentioned before, right, these guys come into our house. We have screens that we hope are protecting, keeping mosquitoes out, but we know that these insects come in, and all it takes is just one heartworm-infected mosquito that can, for your pet to get heartworm disease. And so it's really, really important that even though these animals are not spending a lot of time outside, we are making sure that they are protected year-round.
And what I understand, and again, I'm still, after all these years in veterinary medicine, going up the learning curve for heartworm disease after learning about these top 10 city reports here in the United States by CAPC, is that with dogs, let me back up, with dogs, I can do a heartworm test and feel very confident that if it says it's negative, at least it's negative right now, versus with a cat, the testing is much more difficult. Is that correct?
It is. And unfortunately, I think that cats are tested a lot less frequently, right? So a dog, as part of its usual yearly, annual kind of health maintenance exam, most are going to include a heartworm test, whether it's a heartworm plus Lyme and some of our other tick-borne agents. With cats, that's not always the case. And so, one, it's really important that I encourage pet owners to talk to their veterinarian about testing their cat yearly for heartworms. And we also know, though, that test can be confusing. So sometimes we can get a positive and we can feel comfortable with that in a cat. But sometimes, depending on the test used, if we get a negative, it doesn't necessarily mean that cat is not infected. And sometimes a positive, based on which test, can mean that the cat was exposed but may not have adult worms. And So, unfortunately, one of the manifestations of heartworm disease in cats is just sudden collapse and sudden death. And that's scary. I mean, unfortunately, I've heard of way too many instances of people just coming home and unfortunately finding their cat has just passed. And once they do the necrops and they look, it's because of heartworms. And it's just, we're not looking for it enough. We don't exactly understand heartworm disease enough in cats. And just like in dogs, we've got great preventative drugs. So there's just no point in taking that risk. They've got topicals. They even have, chewables. There's a lot of options for you. Unfortunately, the injectable is not available for kitty cats, but we've got topicals and oral products available to prevent heartworm disease in our kitty cats.
And we have a cat. Topicals are so nice because, yes, even my own cats don't really appreciate me pilling them.
For sure. And, we've got, and I think the field is just going to keep getting better. I think we're just going to keep getting better and more products to help prevent this disease. And, we had talked previously a little bit about the timing, too. And one of the things I think it's important to mention is how these products work. We are actually not preventing heartworm infection. We're preventing heartworm disease, and the drugs work backwards, essentially, most of the drugs. And so it's important to know I want every pet protected all year round. But if you're traveling to a heartworm endemic area and maybe you haven't been so good with prevention, it's really important not only to give the drug before you leave, but we need to make sure that we're getting those preventative products when we get back as well, because these drugs work retroactively. And so obviously I'm going to advocate for every pet tested and protected. We want them all on these preventatives all year round. But if a pet owner maybe has missed a month or maybe they ran out, it's really important that they're getting this product, especially when they get back from being in a heartworm endemic area.
So it's not the morning after pill, it's the bite after pill.
Right,
keep
exactly.
Going.
Exactly.
Well, as we have to wrap this up right now, and yes, I love your enthusiasm and that we could just go on because I'm learning so much from you. Thank you very much. So if a pet parent, a veterinarian wants to stay up to date on heartworm disease in their community, like I learned about Oceanside, and that's probably 20 minutes south of where I live right now. It's like, oh my goodness, need to go back into the practice and really, really push heartworm preventive for cats and dogs. Where can a veterinarian, a pet parent go if they want to know what's going in their community or if they're planning on traveling with their pet?
Yeah, so they have put together, we have a great website called petdiseasealerts.org. So
that's one word.
Petdiseasealerts.org, and it's a fantastic site that actually has what we call forecasting. 30-day forecasting. So what you can do is you pull up, there's a map of the United States. I've got it pulled up on my computer right now. You can pick an area where you're going. So, and then you can pick what parasite you're concerned with. So we have tick-borne diseases, we've got heartworm disease, and you can click within a state, you can click counties, and you can see what the 30-day forecast is for that parasite or that disease agent of choice, what the 30-day forecast is, and how that compares historically to what's been happening around this time of year. And so the hope is that just like if you were to travel, you would pull up your phone and say, okay, I'm going to look and see what the weather's going to be like when I'm traveling, to Ohio next weekend. We advocate for people to do that just the same way, right? You're going to be traveling here. I need to pull this up and look to see what kind of additional risk my pets might be facing. It's also a really fantastic client education tool. I think this is a great way for pet owners to be aware of what's happening in their area, and for veterinarians to use this as a talking point to start making sure those conversations are starting, to making sure that we're advocating for prevention and yearly testing.
Thank you so much for my education. I know my pet parents listening in today have also learned a tremendous amount. So bottom line is protect your pets, cats, dogs, indoor, outdoor, year-round, no matter where you live, because heartworm is a deadly disease that's 100% preventable. Dr. Pulaski, thank you again so much for being with us today.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So this is Dr. Bernadine Cruz. You've been listening to The Pet Doctor on Pet Life Radio. Please tune in again next week. We'll give you more information on how to make you the best possible pet owner. Take care.
Pets can be a wonderful addition to your life because they're a member of the family. Keeping them healthy and happy is important. Pet Life Radio presents The Pet Doctor with veterinary media consultant and veterinarian Dr. Bernadine Cruz. Whether you have a dog, cat, reptile, or rabbit, you'll find answers for your pets straight from the vets. The Pet Doctor, on demand every week, only on PetLifeRadio.com.